Hello there everyone, it is Toby from TIJ Music, and today I'm going to be reviewing another album, and today it is the turn of an album that I really enjoy. It's one that I'm really glad I'm reviewing because I just don't think I'd be able to review it any other time. I just wanted to get on with it and review it now, and that is Behind Closed Doors by Charlie Rich. This is probably an album that many of you have never heard, an artist you probably have never heard of, and if you have heard of Charlie Rich, you probably only know him for his two hit singles, Behind Closed Doors and The Most Beautiful Girl. And it's an artist that I just think he's an impeccable artist, really. Very underrated. I'm glad a lot of people agree with me. I've been looking around the YouTube comments this morning at some of the songs that have been posted on YouTube, and a lot of people saying, wow, I really remember this stuff, or it's really good music and very underrated. And that's an opinion I'll really go along with. And it's quite odd, really, in Charlie Rich's career, because he's an artist that probably only had that one big album. Apart from that, he didn't really have much. He had a few singles that I've listened to, the likes of Every Time You Touch Me I Get High and A Very Special Love Song, I Love My Friend, and a few more of those. But apart from the 11 songs that make up Behind Closed Doors, personally for me anyway, I don't know about anybody else, but for me, there isn't really much more to Charlie Rich's career. It's very much right. It's kind of sporadic here and there. There's a few singles that are half decent, but this album is what makes Charlie Rich a great artist, and it's just impeccable, really. It's one that I really enjoy listening to. I am quite a country fan, and Charlie Rich is an artist that I love, you know, probably with sort of the ranking of the likes of Roy Orbison and Johnny Cash and Elvis Presley, which, funnily enough, the first fact of the video I'll give you is that he started his career in 1958 as a session musician for Sun Records alongside the three artists I've just mentioned. So pretty good company, as well as Jerry Lee Lewis, I think. So again, very, very, very good company. But this album didn't come out until 1973, so you've got to question what Charlie Rich did for 15 years. Well, he went, of course, to Sun Records in 1958. His third single was the only one that reached the top 30 in 1960, called Lonely Weekends. And to be fair, sold more than 1 million copies, but then none of his 7 follow-up singles were really a success. But surprisingly, he did, well, not surprisingly, in fact, his career stalled and he left the Sun Records label to join a subsidiary of the RCA Vector label Groove in 1963. His first single was a fairly minor hit, Big Boss Man. Again, never heard these songs, to be honest. I've only really listened to Behind Closed Doors and Afterwards, to be honest. I'm not really fussed about that earlier stuff, because I think that a lot of artists, probably in the early 60s, were more forced by their record companies to record stuff. That's just proven by the amount of rubbish that Elvis has recorded in his career. You know, there's some solid stuff, but I think a lot of that comes towards the end, the late 60s, where possibly Elvis had orchestrated his career a little bit more than, you know, pushy record directors who want to earn a buck from an aspiring and good artist. But then, you know, despite his lack of commercial success, certainly consistent anyway, Epic Records is a massive record company, a subsidiary of Sony Records, Sony Entertainment, and they still have a lot of big artists today. Some ones that I think off the top of my head, George Michael in particular, he went to court with Sony, and Epic Records I think was a certain big part of that. But this album was released on Epic Records. Quite interestingly, he was signed by Epic mainly on the recommendation of Billy Sherrill, and that's quite an important name because the producer Billy Sherrill was the one who went on to produce Behind Closed Doors and had a massive role in that, really, and did really well in producing the album. So onto the album. You know, we've talked about the background, so let's talk about the album a little bit. So 4 songs from the album are written by the Rich family, funnily enough. It's very much a family affair. Only one of the 11 songs from the album was written by Charlie Rich himself. 2 were written by his wife, and 1 was written by his teenage son. And we'll talk about the songs a little bit more in a minute. But the songs certainly that his wife and son contributed are fantastic, to be honest. His son only a teenager at the time, and I'll tell you what, if I could produce music like he did at my age, goodness me, I'd be having a ball. But the album did really well. You know, it's really good to see that Epic's decision to hire Charlie Rich paid off. It went number 4 in the UK, number 1 in the in the US in terms of the country chart, and I think it went number 1 in Canada as well. He performed really well in Canada. I think all the singles from the album, bar 1, went to number 1 in Canada, but we'll talk about the singles a little bit more in a minute. And just a few crazy stats really about the album. It received the Country Music Association Award for Album of the Year. The title track, which was written by Kenny O'Dell, was also named the CMA Single of the Year. Charlie Rich was named the Best Male Vocalist of 1973, and then he also won a Grammy in 1974 for the Best Country Vocal Performance, and also took home 4 Academy of Country Music Awards for the album. And in 2002, the album was certified quadruple platinum in the US and double platinum in Canada by the Recording Industry Association of America, commemorating US sales of over 4 million. So very impressive stats there, really, for an artist that had inconsistent success. And to be fair, really, after this album, it was still inconsistent success. But while it was kind of going up and down before this album, it kind of went like that and then nosedive a little, which wasn't really Charlie Ritchie's fault. I just think they couldn't really follow up this album particularly well. I've looked at some of the albums that he's released, and it just seems they're a bit bog standard. You know, the titles like The Fabulous Charlie Rich. There's nothing that has really got a story and the album that depicts this sort of thing like Behind Closed Doors. But in terms of the musicians on the album, they're very good spread of musicians. Of course, we've got Charlie Rich on vocals, we've got 5 men on guitar, we've got Billy Sanford, Dale Sellers, Harold Bradley, Jerry Kennedy and Ray Eddington, who many work with Roy Orbison's band. We've got Bob Moore on bass, who works with Elvis Presley, and Hargus Pig Robbins, Piggy was known as, who was an American session keyboard and piano player. Played on records for a real range of artists. I'll read through them: Dolly Parton, Kenny Rogers, Charlie, Bob Dylan, Neil Young, and funnily enough, Mark Knopfler from Dire Straits. And an interesting fact is that Robbins is blind. That's really an interesting one. And we've got Buddy Harman and Kenny Buttery on drums. Again, worked with Orbison, Presley, and Cash, and was a big role in Bob Dylan's music, apparently. And then probably the most known group out of these is the Jordanaires, who were on background vocals on tracks 4, 7 and 10, and of course had background for Elvis Presley's early stuff, the likes of Don't, Jailhouse Rock. A lot of those songs had the Jordanaires on backing vocals. So that's the majority of the musicians, only really the ones you need to know. I'm not going to list every single musician because that would just be pointless, but a quick comment before we get into the music, and to be fair, we have been going for a bit now yapping, is that the production, the instrumentation, the orchestration, whatever you want to call it, the musicians on this album really are all impeccable, to be quite honest, and that really makes the album really good. And there's 11 tracks on this album. We start with the title track, the single Behind Closed Doors, that went to number 1 in the US country charts and number 16 in the UK. And I'm going to be rating these songs one by one to give an overall rating for the album. So the first song from the album is the title track, Behind Closed Doors. I'm going to give this a 9 rating out of 10. It's a really good song. It's a fantastic song. Went to number 1 in the US on the country charts, number 16 in the UK, and its B-side was A Sunday Kind of Woman, which is track 4, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a while. But it's the first single from the album, really iconic piano playing at the start. And funnily enough, it was inspired by the Watergate scandal, which of course was taking place about this time, about 1972, with Richard Nixon as the US president. Of course, subtle links that the discussions they were having about Watergate were behind closed doors, and apparently that gave Kenny O'Dell the inspiration to write the song. And it's a fantastic song, and funnily enough, it was banned by quite a lot of radio stations for apparently being too suggestive about intimacy, and you know, it is a very intimate love song, and it's one I really enjoy listening to. But I do think it's a little bit different. I don't quite buy the intimacy argument. I think it's probably more about, you know, this is my interpretation, that it is behind what happens behind closed doors, whether that be positive or negative, and that the opinions of nobody else really matters. So it's not necessarily right when we go behind closed doors. It's the obvious meaning of the song, but I think for me, it's the lyrics suggest anyway that whatever anybody else thinks doesn't really matter, because when we get behind closed doors and it's just the two of us, that's all that matters. And I think that's probably more the meaning of the song. Again, I'm not quite sure, but I think that's my interpretation of that. Charlie Ritchie's vocals on this one, absolutely fantastic, and a really good song, so we're going to rate that one as number 9. So the follow-up to Behind Closed Doors is quite a tricky one to follow on from, to be honest. A really good song to start open the album, and that definitely continues, and side 1 is just fantastic, really. And If You Wouldn't Be My Lady is the second song. I'm also going to rate that at 9. Again, great instrumentation, a bit of a faster tempo to Behind Closed Doors, but gets a bit quicker throughout, but it's a nice tempo. And it's quite catchy, to be honest. It's just a top-class song. It really follows on from Behind Closed Doors well. But not really much to discuss about this one. It's a top-class song. It's a staple of mine, and I just really enjoy it. So third up, and funnily enough, it's exactly the same rating again, at a 9. It's You Never Really Wanted Me. Now, this one was the song that was written by Charlie Ritchie's son, and I talked about this one a little bit in the introduction. And the lyrics just absolutely fantastic. Out of the 3 I've mentioned so far, definitely the slowest tempo one. And it was a B-side for... What was it a B-side for? It was for We Love Each Other, the 9th track on the album. It's another fantastic song, as I said, written by his teenage son. I'm quite a fan of the depressing songs, so this is really fantastic. And the piano in this is just great, and Charlie Ritchie's soft vocals are equally as fantastic. And it's a fantastic song. It's it's one I really enjoy, and that just continues really into the fourth song of the album. Again, another 9, funnily enough. Not quite 10s, because I don't think that they are the ultimate songs. I wouldn't go, wow, this is as good as some songs, but I rate them at 9 is because they're very good, as in that, the top class, but they're not quite up at the ultimate. And I just think that's because I don't really know why it is, but I think that 9s are an absolutely fair rating, and you'll be happy to find out possibly that this is the last song that we have 9s for in a row anyway. And this is a Sunday Cotton and a Woman. It was the B-sides Behind Closed Doors that we mentioned earlier. Again, I've mentioned in my notes, and this is absolutely true, the brilliance of side 1 continues, and great songs at the start of the song, particularly with the guitar, and the soft vocals work really well again. And basically the song kind of depicts that it's not a Friday night or Saturday night woman, and it's written by Charlie Ritchie's wife. The first song that's written by Charlie Ritchie's wife on the album. It's a really great drum work, drum work that builds the story up quite nicely, and it's a great track. It's one I really enjoy, and it's basically I've had plenty of these Friday night women, but will a Sunday kind of woman take to me? And it's a really interesting song, kind of about settling down, all that sort of thing, and I think it's an absolutely fantastic song. Again, like the previous songs, a little bit of a slower tempo, but builds up over the song, which is really nice, and I think that's a great asset to a lot of the songs on the album. I think their producer, Billy Sherrill, is really noteworthy and creditable for that fact. So side 1 ends off with the longest track on the album, coming in at 3 minutes 59. These quite quick tracks by comparison of a lot of the albums I review, but not really a surprise. Country songs tend to be a little bit shorter generally, but it's the only song that was penned by Charlie Ritchie himself, and not really much to say on this one. Unfortunately, it's only a rating of a 6, which brings the album down a little bit, but it's just not one of my favourites. It's a decent song, but if there was 11 songs of this stature on the album, it would be a lot less than it is as an album, and it's definitely a half-decent song. It's certainly a decent song, but nothing great, and I've mentioned in my notes that it is rather forgettable. It's the only song from the album not in my Spotify playlist, so that just shows that it's not a very good song, but it's half decent, to be fair. It's nothing down on Charlie Rich. I just think compared to, and I try and compare it in doing the ratings, try and compare it to other songs on the album, it's not really a fantastic one, and that's why side 1 ends off a little bit poorly, but apart from that, side 1 is just brilliant. Now we get into the 6 tracks of side 2, and that starts absolutely fantastically with the second song that a lot of you probably know, and that's The Most Beautiful Girl. Second single off the album, of course, Behind Closed Doors is the first one, and the B-side of this is Till I Can't Take It Anymore. And funnily enough, this performed a lot better than Behind Closed Doors worldwide. It performed the same in the US. Of course, you can't go any more than number 1, but this was number 1 on the Billboard charts. Behind Closed Doors entered at number 1 in the US country charts. But this song also went to number 2 in the UK, so a very good song worldwide. That was the opinion of many people. And as I've said here, very well known like Behind Closed Doors, but I'm giving this an 8 because it's not a personal favourite of mine compared to the songs on side 1. It's another great song, but just doesn't have the, I suppose, musically as much as the songs on side 1. I feel like there's a real good story developed on those songs, and this is maybe a little bit more cliche, so that's why I give this one an 8, but still a really good track. And then we move into I Take It On Home, which is a little bit of a bizarre one. Unfortunately, I haven't really been able to source as much information as I would have liked to on this album, because the stats and all that are a little bit sketchy. The Wikipedia page is sort of about that big compared to some albums which are like that big, because obviously this album's not very well known. So I've had to search quite a bit on the internet, and this song was apparently the first single from 1972, the year before the album came out. If anybody knows anything about that, leave that down in the comments. But this was the technical first single from 1972. Went to number 6 on the US country charts and number 3 on the Canada country charts, possibly because it was released a little bit earlier. I'm not really sure. This one is 7, so the second worst song on the album, if you want to look at it that way. But again, a really good song. I'm only rating it a 7 because it's a little bit poorer than the other songs on the album. The second song, written by Kenny O'Dell, of course, he also wrote Behind Closed Doors, and it's very different to the rest of the songs that I mentioned. More of a bluesy, jazzy song, so possibly goes back to the roots of Charlie Ritchie's career, but still a decent song, but a little bit like Peace on You, a little bit forgettable. Track 8 is another B-side. This is the B-side of the one we just mentioned. I thought it was the title track, of course it wasn't. It's The Most Beautiful Girl. The B-side of The Most Beautiful Girl is Till I Can't Take It Anymore. This has been rated an 8. It's a brilliant B-side, to be honest, and probably as good as the A-side, suggested by the similar rating. And this is another slow-tempo song, and a comment that's generally made, and I think this is correct, is that slow-tempo songs definitely work really well with Charlie Ritchie's voice, and the general feel of the album. It's meant to be sort of a melancholic, reflective album, and it really fits in with that really nicely. And it basically tells the story of, even though the partner is lying, the protagonist just believes them because they love them. So again, a very interesting narrative that's put forward in this song. And again, another good song. Not one of my favourites off the album, suggested by that 8 rating. But again, it's a solid song. Like a lot of the songs on this album, it's a very solid one. That's followed up by song 9, We Love Each Other, which is also a single. Again, I'm not really sure about how this performed. I couldn't find a rating for how this performed in the US, but definitely came out in the US. I know it was number 37 in the UK. I'd Take It Home on Home, which I just mentioned, didn't actually come out in the UK. It was only the 3 singles. So Behind Closed Doors, The Most Beautiful Girl, and We Love Each Other that were released in the UK. And I think this is probably the best song of side 2, to be quite honest. It was the 3rd single. Again, not quite sure of the performance. And this is just really got quite simple lyrics. And great songs don't need flashy lyrics. It's just, we love each other. And it's just a simple thing. It's really nice, and it's a little bit of a slower tempo one once again, but really fits into the album quite nicely. And that's followed on by I'm Not Going Hungry, track 10. And this is only an 8 again. And no, they're not. It's not like they're going hungry because, the stomach's rumbling. No, it's not quite like they're hungry for love, basically. And it's not as simple as the title, as I just say, but instrumentation, great, once again. It's a really good song again, but not quite in my personal favourites. That's why I probably think that side 1 is better than side 2. But it's a good song. I think a general comment that's a good one to make about this album is that the instrumentation is fantastic, but doesn't shout above Charlie Ritchie's voice, and that's an important comment to make, and Charlie Ritchie's voice very much stands out on the album. And the final song on the album is Nothing in the World to Do With Me, the 2nd track written by Charlie Ritchie's wife, Margaret Ann. Another slow tempo track, and just ends the album really well, so I'm going to rate that at a number 9. I don't know why I say a number 9. Rate that one at 9. And it's just a brilliant track, and the album is really full of brilliant tracks, slow tempo tracks, and it never deviates away from the meaning of the album, which is really nice. I don't think any of these deviate away. I think we could probably do without Peace on You, but apart from that, that's the only negative really of the album. And it's a really good album, and that's why it's rated as a result of the averages from what we have said in terms of the ratings. It's rated at an 8.3 out of 10, which is about right for the album. It's a solid album. I think any album above an 8 out of 10 is certainly credible. So that's it then, folks, for today's review of Behind Closed Doors by Charlie Rich. Have you listened to the album? Let me know down in the comments, and let me know what you think of it. But if you did enjoy that, leave a like, comment down below, subscribe for more album reviews, and if you want to request an album, make sure to go to the channel, make sure it's not been done yet, and leave it down in the comments. But for now, I've been Toby from TIJ Music. Thank you very much for tuning in today, and until the next time, I'll see you guys later. Goodbye for now.